My name is Cassandra Whitmore, though everyone calls me Cass. I'm 31 years old, and until last Tuesday night, I believed I was building a future with my boyfriend, Nolan Pierce. Looking back now, I realize the relationship didn't end because of one text message. It ended because I finally stopped pretending that 3 years of disappointment were just a rough patch. Nolan and I had been together for 3 years, living together for the last one in my apartment. Every legal document connected to that place carried my name. The lease, the utilities, the internet, the insurance, everything. Nolan always said we'd put his name on the lease later. Later never came. Whenever someone asked how we split expenses, I always smiled and answered, "He helps whenever he can." That answer sounded generous. The truth wasn't. Rent was somehow always due during one of Nolan's tight months. Utilities somehow became my responsibility because he was waiting on a payment. Yet somehow, there was always enough money for concert tickets, golf with coworkers, new sneakers, expensive whiskey, or spontaneous weekends with friends. Every time I noticed the imbalance, I talked myself out of seeing it. Relationships weren't supposed to be 50-50 every single month. People struggled. People helped each other. That was what I told myself. What I never admitted was that I had quietly become responsible for almost every part of our shared life. I paid the rent because someone had to. I renewed the insurance because Nolan forgot. I called maintenance. I replaced broken appliances. I remembered birthdays. I scheduled holidays. I planned dinners. I bought groceries. I carried the invisible weight that keeps two people functioning as a couple. The strange thing about emotional labor is that nobody notices it while you're carrying it. They only notice when you finally put it down. There was a time when Nolan wasn't like this. Or maybe he was, and I simply wasn't close enough to see it yet. When we first started dating, he drove across town after work just because I casually mentioned I was craving cheesecake. He remembered my mother's birthday before I did. He surprised me with flowers after difficult meetings. He made me laugh until my stomach hurt. That man was the reason I stayed. Every time the newer version disappointed me, I compared him to the old version instead of comparing him to what I actually deserved. That's how people stay too long. Not because every day is miserable, because every bad week keeps getting measured against one beautiful memory. Money wasn't our biggest problem. Communication was. Nolan had perfected a habit that slowly changed the atmosphere inside our apartment. He could wake up affectionate, kiss me goodbye, tell me he loved me, then return home acting like I was a complete stranger. If I asked whether everything was okay, he'd sigh dramatically. "Why do you always think something's wrong?" If I asked whether I'd upset him, he'd shake his head. "Cass, you're overthinking again." If I pushed a little harder, trying to understand what had changed, he'd accuse me of interrogating him. "You don't have to monitor every emotion I have." Eventually, I stopped asking, not because I wasn't curious, because every conversation somehow became evidence that I was the difficult one. That's the part people outside the relationship never see. Nobody wakes up one morning and decides to stop expressing themselves. It happens one compromise at a time. You stop mentioning something because the last conversation lasted 3 exhausting hours. You stop asking questions because you're tired of apologizing for asking them. You stop pointing out patterns because you're told you're imagining things. Little by little, you become quieter. Not happier, just quieter. And one day you realize you've spent more energy protecting someone else's comfort than your own peace. There is a very specific kind of emotional exhaustion that comes from constantly editing yourself before speaking. Every sentence gets rehearsed. Every concern gets softened. Every disappointment gets filtered. Eventually, you don't know which thoughts are yours anymore and which ones have already been censored before they ever reached your mouth. That had become my normal. I'm telling you all of this because, otherwise, What happened next sounds impulsive. It wasn't. It was the final page of a story that had been writing itself for years. Tuesday started like every other Tuesday. Nolan kissed my forehead before leaving for work. He joked that I'd made the coffee strong enough to remove paint from walls. Around lunchtime, he texted me a picture of a ridiculous sandwich one of his coworkers had ordered. I laughed. He sent a laughing emoji back. Nothing about that conversation suggested the relationship would end 12 hours later. He usually came home around 6. By 7, I noticed the apartment felt strangely empty. The pasta sauce simmering on the stove filled the kitchen with garlic and basil. The television played quietly in the background. Outside, rain tapped softly against the balcony doors. Everything looked ordinary, except Nolan wasn't there. At 7:15, I called, straight to voicemail. I wasn't worried yet, just confused. I sent a simple message. Everything okay? No accusations, no pressure, no guilt, just concern. An hour passed, still nothing. I called one more time, voicemail again. People love throwing around words like controlling these days. Let me be perfectly clear. Calling your boyfriend twice over 2 hours after he disappears without saying a word isn't controlling. It's called caring about someone who lives with you. At exactly 9:12 p.m., my phone buzzed. For a second, relief washed over me. Maybe his battery had died. Maybe he'd been pulled into overtime. Maybe... Instead, I read 13 words that completely changed my life. I'm not your property. Stop calling me. That was it. No explanation. No, I'm okay. No apology for worrying me. Nothing. I stared at the screen while the pasta sauce quietly burned behind me. Those words looked almost rehearsed, as if they'd existed long before that evening, and Tuesday simply happened to be the day he finally decided to send them. The more I read them, the calmer I became. Not because they didn't hurt, because they explained everything. Suddenly, every previous argument lined up in my mind. Every time he'd called me needy, every time he'd rolled his eyes when I checked whether he'd gotten home safely, every time he'd told me I was too emotional. Every memory fit together like pieces of a puzzle I hadn't wanted to complete. Normally, I would have apologized. Normally, I would have written 3 paragraphs explaining I wasn't trying to control him. Normally, I would have blamed myself. Instead, something inside me became incredibly still. No anger, no panic, just certainty. I turned off the stove, opened the kitchen window to clear the smoke, read his message one final time, then typed back. Understood. I'm not your girlfriend anymore. Don't come home. I pressed send before I could second-guess myself. Then I searched for the nearest emergency locksmith. 40 minutes later, an older man carrying a worn toolbox stood outside my apartment. He glanced from my driver's license to the lease agreement. Everything matched. He simply nodded. I'll have it finished in 20 minutes. He never asked why. Maybe he'd seen too many nights like this. When he handed me the new keys, they felt strangely heavy, like tiny pieces of metal carrying the weight of an entire relationship. After he left, I placed my phone face down on the kitchen counter. I reheated dinner, watched half a movie, made tea. For the first time in months, I wasn't waiting for Nolan's mood to determine how my evening would go. The apartment felt different, quieter, lighter, almost unfamiliar. Then the phone started vibrating. One missed call, then another. Voicemails, text messages, calls every few minutes. I never touched the phone. I already knew exactly how the night would unfold. First, anger. Then disbelief. Then bargaining. Then tears. Nolan always followed the same script whenever he realized he was losing control. At 1:03 a.m., someone began pounding on the apartment door. Cass! His voice echoed through the hallway. Open the damn door! I remained in the kitchen holding a glass of water. He tried his key. Once, twice, 3 times. The lock refused to move. "What did you do?" Silence. "Cass!" Another hard bang shook the door. "We had one fight! Adults don't do this!" No, we hadn't had a fight. He'd made a declaration. I'd simply accepted it. "You're acting crazy!" he shouted. "This is exactly why I needed space." There it was, the familiar accusation. Whenever Nolan couldn't explain himself, I became the problem. Whenever his choices created consequences, my reaction became the real issue. For years, those words would have broken me. That night, they simply sounded repetitive. Around 20 minutes later, the tone changed. His voice became quieter. "Cass, I forgot my charger. My clothes are inside. I can't stay out here all night." Then came the sentence I'd heard after almost every argument we'd ever had. "I didn't mean it like that." I closed my eyes. That sentence had restarted our relationship dozens of times. It always sounded sincere. It always changed nothing. This time, I didn't answer. Around dawn, I finally slept on the couch. Not because I couldn't bear sleeping in our bedroom, because the couch somehow felt like neutral territory. When I woke up just after 8, my phone displayed 37 missed calls. I made coffee, ignored every voicemail. At 8:46 a.m., there was another knock. This one was softer, carefully controlled. I walked to the front door and opened it only as far as the security chain allowed. Nolan stood in the hallway, wearing yesterday's clothes beneath one of my oversized hoodies. Dark circles framed his eyes. The confidence he'd always carried had been replaced by something uncertain. "So," he said quietly, "you're really doing this?" "So," he said quietly, "you're really doing this?" I looked at him through the narrow gap in the chained door. "I'm not doing anything to you, Nolan." His eyebrows pulled together. "You changed the locks." "You told me to stop calling you." His jaw tightened. "That isn't what I meant." "It's exactly what you wrote." For several seconds, he simply stared at me, as though he expected those words to magically undo everything that had happened overnight. Finally, his eyes drifted past my shoulder into the apartment. "I live here." "No," I answered calmly. "You lived here. With me." His expression hardened. "You can't erase 3 years overnight." "I didn't erase anything." "You drew the line." Silence stretched between us. For the first time since we'd started dating, neither of us rushed to fill it. Nolan crossed his arms. "I needed one night to myself." "You needed one night," I repeated, "without telling me where you were." "You called me twice." "Because I thought something had happened to you." "You don't own me." "I never said I did." His breathing became heavier. "You always twist everything." I almost smiled. That sentence had become one of his favorites. Whenever facts cornered him, suddenly I was twisting them. Whenever his own words came back to him, I was taking them out of context. It was never about what he actually said. It was always about what he claimed he meant afterward. He stepped closer to the door. "Cass, I wasn't breaking up with you. I just wanted space." I nodded slowly. "And I gave it to you." "That's not funny." I wasn't joking. He rubbed both hands over his face. "You know what I meant." "No. I only know what you chose to say." His eyes searched mine. He was looking for the version of me that always appeared eventually. The woman who apologized first. The woman who accepted rewritten history because arguing was exhausting. The woman who convinced herself intentions mattered more than actions. She wasn't standing behind the door anymore. "You always do this," he muttered. "Do what?" "You make everything so literal." That sentence settled something inside me. Too literal. I had worried all night that maybe I'd misunderstood him. Maybe I had reacted too strongly. Then he said those 3 words. Too literal. He genuinely believed the problem wasn't sending that message. The problem was that I believed him. You disappeared for 4 hours, I said quietly. I called twice because I was worried. You replied by telling me you weren't my property. And somehow I'm the unreasonable one? His shoulders sagged for just a second. Then they stiffened again. You should have known I was angry. I did. So why didn't you ask what was wrong? I blinked. I did. You called. Exactly. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. For the first time, I watched him struggle to reshape the story. Normally, I'd help him. I'd volunteer explanations. I'd soften my language. I'd rescue the conversation before it became uncomfortable. This time, I simply waited. Silence can be incredibly revealing. People eventually tell on themselves. You embarrassed me, he finally said. I spent the night outside. No. You spent the night wherever you chose to go before you texted me. His eyes widened. What does that mean? It means you sent that message from somewhere. You had somewhere to be. You just didn't expect it to become permanent. His face flushed bright red. You think I cheated? I didn't say that. You implied it. I don't actually know where you were. What I do know is that you weren't worried about sleeping somewhere until after I stopped waiting. For the first time, genuine uncertainty crossed his face. Not sadness, not regret. Uncertainty. The certainty he'd carried for years, that no matter what happened I'd always still be here, was beginning to crack. His voice softened. Cass, I don't have anywhere to go. I looked at him for a long moment. 6 months earlier, those words would have shattered me. I would have opened the door before he finished the sentence. I would have apologized for making him uncomfortable. I'd probably have cooked breakfast. Instead, I heard something different. Not fear of losing me. Fear of losing convenience. You had somewhere yesterday. That was different. How? He looked away. It just was. No, Nolan. It only became different because you assumed I'd still be here. His breathing slowed. I never thought you'd actually... He stopped himself. Actually what? Leave. There it was, the truth. Not, I never thought you'd stop loving me. Not, I never thought we'd break up. I never thought you'd leave. The words hung in the hallway. He hadn't believed I had limits. My patience had become part of the furniture, permanent, guaranteed, available whenever he decided to come back. He lowered his voice. Can we please talk inside? No. People are watching. I glanced toward the empty hallway. No one is watching. They'll hear. I almost laughed. Even now, image mattered more than honesty. You care more about appearances than you cared about telling me where you were last night. I said I needed space. You said I wasn't allowed to care. That's not what I meant. There it is again. He frowned. What? Everything is always about what you meant. Never what you actually did. He leaned his forehead against the doorframe. I'm tired. So am I. I barely slept. I haven't slept well in months. His eyes lifted slowly. What does that mean? It means I spent the last year wondering which version of you was coming home every night. The loving one. The silent one. The irritated one. The one who acted like my existence annoyed him. I never knew. And somehow that became normal. He looked genuinely confused. I wasn't that bad. I smiled sadly. That's exactly the problem. You still don't see it. For nearly a minute, neither of us spoke. Then his entire posture changed. His shoulders dropped. His eyes became glossy. His voice broke. I'm sorry. I really am. I was overwhelmed. I had a terrible day. My boss dumped 3 extra projects on me. My phone kept dying. I snapped. I shouldn't have texted that. I know. The apology sounded convincing. It probably was genuine, at least partly. But I'd heard genuine apologies before. The problem wasn't whether he felt sorry. The problem was that every apology reset the clock without fixing the pattern. I appreciate you saying that, I answered. But we're still over. His face fell. You can't end 3 years because of one bad night. I'm not. I'm ending 3 years of bad patterns. He stared at me. You've been keeping score. No. I finally started paying attention. His breathing became uneven. So that's it? After everything? I nodded. After everything. His expression changed again. This time, the softness disappeared. This is emotional abuse. The accusation landed between us. Months ago, it would have devastated me. Instead, I found myself almost disappointed. We'd reached the predictable part. Whenever vulnerability failed, blame returned. I haven't threatened you. I haven't followed you. I haven't insulted you. I accepted exactly what you told me. That's not abuse. His lips pressed into a thin line. You've become cold. No, I've become clear. He looked at me for another long moment, then quietly asked the question I don't think he ever imagined himself asking. Where am I supposed to go? I answered honestly, I don't know. But that stopped being my responsibility the moment you decided my concern was something to punish. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. For several seconds, he simply stood there. Then I watched recognition slowly replace disbelief. He wasn't going to talk me out of this. He wasn't going to wear me down. He wasn't going to wait until I felt guilty enough to unlock the door. The woman standing in front of him wasn't negotiating anymore. She was finished. Without another word, Nolan turned and walked slowly down the hallway. I watched through the peephole as he reached the parking lot. He immediately pulled out his phone. Within minutes, mine began vibrating again. Unknown number. Declined. Another unknown number. Declined. A text from his mother appeared first. I hope you're proud of yourself. Nolan only needed 1 night to cool off. I didn't answer. 5 minutes later, another message arrived. This one from his best friend, Grant. You're proving exactly why he needed space. I deleted it. Around noon, another text appeared. This time from Nolan himself. No accusations, no insults, no blame. Just one carefully written sentence. Can I at least come get my laptop and some clothes? I stared at the screen for several seconds before replying. We'll arrange a pickup later with someone else present. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, one message arrived. So you don't trust me anymore? I looked at those words for a long time. It wasn't about trust anymore. Trust assumes 2 people are trying to protect each other. We hadn't been doing that for a very long time. Without typing another explanation, I locked my phone and set it back on the kitchen counter. The quiet didn't last forever. Late that afternoon, someone knocked on my door again. This time, it wasn't Nolan alone. His mother, Diane Pierce, stood beside him with the determined expression of someone who had already decided I was wrong before hearing a single word. I opened the door only as far as the security chain allowed. Cassandra, Diane began, let's be reasonable. I am being reasonable, I replied. We're arranging Nolan's belongings, that's all. She frowned. You locked my son out over one argument. No. I accepted a decision he already made. I held up my phone and showed her the message. I'm not your property. Stop calling me. She read it silently before looking back at Nolan. You sent this? I was angry, he admitted quietly. For the first time, Diane didn't have an immediate response. I looked at Nolan. You expected me to ignore your words because I always had before. He lowered his eyes. I never thought you'd actually leave. I know. That's exactly why I had to. Neither of them argued after that. Diane gently touched her son's arm and they walked away. I closed the door feeling lighter than I had in years. That afternoon, I packed Nolan's belongings. 3 years of a relationship fit into a handful of boxes. As I moved through the apartment, I noticed how much of my own space I'd quietly surrendered. Half the closet, most of the bathroom shelf. Kitchen cabinets I'd stopped using because Nolan preferred things arranged differently. None of those changes had happened overnight. They happened one compromise at a time, until I no longer noticed I was living around someone else's comfort instead of my own. That evening, Nolan sent one final message. He apologized. He blamed stress. He blamed work. Then he wrote the sentence that explained everything. I honestly never believed you'd leave me. I stared at those words for a long time. He hadn't mistaken my love. He had mistaken my patience for something permanent. For years, he believed I'd always be waiting, always forgiving, always making room. He never imagined I could choose myself. I typed one final reply. I meant what I said. Please don't contact me again. After that, nothing. No more calls, no more knocks, no more emotional speeches, just silence. 2 days later, my building manager stopped by after Nolan asked for help getting back inside. I showed him the lease and the text message. He nodded once and closed the matter immediately. The following weekend, Nolan's belongings were collected through a third party. We never saw each other again. Driving home, I replayed that Tuesday night one last time. For days, I'd wondered if changing the locks had been too harsh. Eventually, I realized I was asking the wrong question. The real question was why I had spent 3 years believing my own boundaries needed more justification than someone else's disrespect. Our relationship survived because I kept carrying it. When I finally stopped, there wasn't enough left to keep it standing. I don't hate Nolan. I simply understand him now. He became comfortable believing my patience had no ending. He was wrong. So was I. Because I spent years believing love meant making myself smaller. Now the apartment is quiet again. But this silence feels different. It isn't loneliness. It's peace. For the first time in a long time, I'm no longer waiting for someone else to decide whether I'm worth choosing. I already made that decision myself. The apartment was quiet again. For the first time in years, the silence felt peaceful instead of lonely.